I'm Marcus Coward, and this is Wake Up New Bedford. And I'm here with Ted Brillen. Ted, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me.
And so, for all those who do or maybe don't know Ted, he's going to give a little bit of the history about the Riccardis and the Raffa story here in New Bedford. But before we get into any of that, I want to know a little bit more about Ted. So, Ted, where are you from?
I'm originally from Fairhaven
Okay.
as a kid. Now I live in Rochester.
Sure.
I own cranberry bogs, which is a whole nother subject we won't get into.
Sure.
But it's been an up and down business for quite some time. But it keeps me in shape because I have to work hard.
Yeah, I could imagine.
But
Do you come from a big family?
yes, yeah. My father's side of the family, not so much. I mean, he had a couple brothers, but they weren't close, so I never really saw much of that side of the family. But my mother's side of the family, she was Sicilian,
Sure.
a Raffa, and so that is what takes over your life. You know what I mean? If there's an Italian in your life, everything's
Sure.
Italian, but,
Sure.
which is okay because
Yeah.
Italians are good.
No, I love them.
It's
It makes some great food.
Yeah, it makes some great food. You know, passionate people.
Yeah.
It's great.
And so you grew up in Fairhaven?
Yeah, I grew up
Yeah.
in East Fairhaven. I was there till I was 23. So,
Okay.
you know, and then I had a brief relationship, and then met my wife at Pa Raffas.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And that's a 43-year-old story. As of yesterday, my anniversary.
Oh, wow.
Our
Okay, congratulations.
anniversary. Thank you. Thank you. It's
And
wonderful.
so, were you still living in Fairhaven during this time? Like, did you ever live anywhere else?
No.
Yeah.
No, well, according to the story my mother gave me, they lived on Howard Avenue when I was born, but by the time I was, a couple months old, they bought a house in Fairhaven, and that's where I grew up, which was a great place to grow up, in all honesty.
Sure.
I mean, it was rural, but they had beautiful school systems and all. I mean, it was a pleasant place to grow up, and had some good friends. So.
Sure.
I have no complaints about my childhood, that's for sure.
Sure. And so, if you, in these last 20, 30, 40 years, have you ever considered moving anywhere, either out of state or out of the country? And if so, like, where would you have wanted to go?
I mean, living in this area, growing up, when I was in my 20s and 30s and all, in the wintertime, you hop in your car, you drive up north, and you go skiing. If you want to go fishing, you go someplace, or you know somebody that's got a boat, and you go out fishing. You know what I mean? Go sailing. There's so much opportunity to do things that, just pleasant things in life.
Sure, yeah.
If you moved any place else, that would be difficult to do.
True.
I mean, I've
Yeah.
traveled quite a bit. We have traveled, my wife and I. And there are other places on the planet that are pretty nice.
Sure.
But to say I want to live anyplace else, no,
Yeah.
probably not, no.
So you're comfortable and it's convenient.
Yeah.
And it's home.
And it's home. And
Yeah.
I mean, again, being a cranberry grower, this is one of the few places on earth that you can actually grow cranberries.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yeah. Wisconsin now is the biggest area for cranberries, but Massachusetts was the biggest for a very long time.
Interesting.
Going back to the 1800s.
Okay.
This was cranberry capital of the world.
Okay.
So, there's some history there.
So when you're younger, let's say middle school, did you have a dream or an idea of what you might have wanted to be when you grew up?
Yes, I dabble in art. I've done oil paintings from when I was young right through. I mean, I still do them. And I always wanted that to be my career, to be, in the art world.
Interesting. Okay.
But I learned early on that trying to make a living at that is difficult,
Yes.
if not very difficult.
Yeah,
I mean,
it can be rare.
Yes,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, we do have a friend that's an accomplished artist that makes his living doing it, but he's the only one that I know of that's in that, that has been lucky enough to do that.
Sure.
But that's what I wanted to do. I got into photography and related, but none of it really ever panned out as far as being profitable, So and my family was in the restaurant business. So,
Sure.
you know, early on, it was like, well, you want to get a job and make some money? It's like, you come work for us. So,
Sure.
and I mean, to this day, I still work in the restaurant business, you know, part-time, but you can't ever get out of it once you're in it, you know, especially when your family's.
Exactly.
It's all family, but I have no complaints about that either. You know, that was a good life for me also. You know? But then when I got married, had kids, the restaurant business is difficult.
Okay.
It's time consuming. It's always nights, weekends, holidays. And when you've got kids, you know, you want to spend a little more time with them.
Of course.
And so that's why I switched over and, you know, got into cranberries and all, which was marvelous as far as having a family life. I mean, my wife used to come to work with me.
Sure.
And it was pleasant. We always got along. You know, a lot of people say you can't work with your husband or wife or whatever. No, we did it wonderfully. And she would bring the kids. She'd come to the bog with the kids. The kids would play all day long. They would see what we were doing. So, you know, it wasn't like, you know.
This sounds like a dream, Ted. What do you mean?
It is a very ideal situation. And you know, throughout the years, we've done all right with it. It's been profitable enough to make it worth our time and trouble, you know.
And so, still rewinding a little bit, when you're young, or at what age do you realize that art isn't a viable course of action for a career?
Unfortunately, early on, I did go for a job as a graphic artist. And, and I still remember to this day. I was working at Pa Raffas probably 20 hours a week. And I don't remember what the pay was. I mean, back then it was like $3 an hour, and that was pretty good.
Sure. Okay.
So, you know, so I mean, whatever my take-home pay was at the end of the week working part-time, I pursued this job as a graphic artist, and it paid considerably less working 40 hours than I was making working in the restaurant at 20 hours. You know, and I'm thinking, clearly this isn't going to work out the way I had hoped. You know.
Yeah.
I did actually do that a little bit, but it was not rewarding enough. I mean, considering you either got to be real happy with what you're doing or make some money. I mean, unfortunately, that's what makes the world go around. So it didn't really work out for me. And I, you know, I regret that only because that's what I wanted to do.
Sure.
You know, I wanted to work in the art field, and it just did not work out.
But I'm glad you stuck with it, that you're still at least doing it as a hobby.
I still do it, yeah. And recently, again, my daughters, you know, I have a few paintings that I've done in the house, and they've all claimed them. You know, it's like I'm not gone yet, but, you know, they've claimed them nonetheless.
Sure. I'm glad you like them. Yeah.
And so then my granddaughters were like, well, you know, what are we going to get if they have all those? And I said, well, I'll do some more. So you know, I've been doing them recently just to keep the family happy.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we got a collection now, pick one.
And so your first real job was in the restaurant industry with your family?
Yes. Actually, I mean, my mom, being in the Raffa family, she waitressed at the original Pa Raffas, and I would go there, and I mean, you can put pizza boxes together. So as like a 10-year-old kid, I'd sit there for a few hours and make pizza boxes.
Sure.
And my uncle would give me a couple dollars, you know, whatever, buy you a soda. And so that's where I kind of got into it then. And then as I got a little bit older, I think when I was 15, I started working at Pa Raffas full time. I worked there for almost 15 years before I wanted to become a chef.
Okay.
And so that was an ordeal in itself, but I did. I worked at Red Coach Grill, and they had a program where they would ship you around to different stores, and you would do your time and do training and all until you were what they considered a chef.
Sure.
Which, get the fancy hat.
And so you did that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I did that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you enjoy it? Like, was it worth it?
Yeah. It's a different, you know, being just a cook in an Italian restaurant is, you're limited as to what your knowledge is.
Sure.
Because I mean, you make spaghetti, lasagna, whatever. It's pretty simple stuff. And when I did that chef school thing, it was much more complicated. I mean, you learned how to do all these French, sauces and soups and everything, and it was great. I loved it.
Okay.
I mean, I cook a lot.
Sure.
Not as good as my wife, but I do cook a lot, and I enjoy it. I mean, it's very rewarding to me. All guys should know how to cook, at least a few meals.
It's definitely a lost art. It's either losing art or it's lost in this generation.
Well,
I'm guilty too.
Yeah, when you see all the takeout that
Yep.
people, I mean, it's like, all the friends that we have, it's like, oh yeah, we go out to dinner 2 or 3 times a week. It's like, we don't go out to dinner very often, mostly because I can prepare as good a meal, if not better, in my own house than I can get anywhere.
Sure.
I mean, I've had some good meals in restaurants, don't
Sure.
get me wrong,
Yeah,
but to say, I can cook a good meal,
And it's amazing.
Anytime you want, you come on over.
I'll take you up on that. But it's amazing that you still stay active and stay in shape because you're not a lazy person by any means. So like you still have the mentality that like you're gonna stay active as long as you want, as long as you're able. While some people do just choose the lazier option, be like, yeah, let's just go eat out or let's order,
Yeah. No, I get what you're saying. I mean, I'm not a lazy person. That's for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I could have retired completely years ago, but I still work a lot.
Yeah.
So I guess I like it.
So do you feel like you fell in love with food after your love of art didn't necessarily work out?
I liked working in restaurants.
Okay.
It's a very, as a young person, it's a very active job.
Yeah.
And you're working with other young people for the most part.
Yeah.
And it was very rewarding, and the money was decent.
Yeah.
Considering other options, I mean, working in a restaurant, you do all right for yourself. I don't know. I mean, I guess I didn't try hard to get out of that business for a long time, so obviously I liked it.
Sure.
23 years I worked strictly in restaurants.
Okay.
Before I, decided to go into cranberries, which was completely different, mind you. You know what I mean?
And so after you became a chef, did you go back to working with the family?
I worked in restaurants again for, I don't know, maybe another 5 or 6 years, but then, because I had my own family at that stage of my life,
Okay.
I decided that, restaurants were difficult to raise a family and do that job. Not difficult. I mean, anybody can do it. Lots of people do. But it seemed to make more sense to me to be more of a homebody kind of thing than doing that. But now I work in restaurants once again. At Riccardi's. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, I guess it's in your blood.
How do you even decide on doing a cranberry bog though? Like, was that not really random, or okay?
Not as random as you might think.
Sure.
When I worked at Red Coach Grill, I ended up being at the Middleborough Red Coach Grill, which was a very nice restaurant. I mean, it's been gone for a long time. They got bought out and bought out again and all. But at Middleborough Red Coach Grill, it was at where Lightfoot's. I forget the name of the restaurant.
Sure.
now.
There's a Middleborough.
At the Rotary in Middleborough. And anyway, one of the kids that worked there, one of my better workers, he asked me for time off at what was cranberry harvest time. And he said, listen, I need a couple weeks off to help my parents harvest the bogs. And I'm thinking, this kid's my best worker. I don't want to give him up for a couple of weeks.
Sure.
But whatever. Bob, his name was. And so after a couple of days, I thought, next time he comes in, I'm going to ask him. I said, can I go watch this? Because this sounds interesting, cranberries and all.
Interesting. Okay.
So, he'd come in to do a shift, and I said, are you still? And he said, yeah. He said, if you want to come up, and he gave me the address. He says, come up and watch. We'll be, loading trucks and all. So, I did. I went and watched, and got into a conversation with his mother standing there watching, and I'm thinking, wow, this seems like a real, earthy type of way to make a living that and by what she was telling me, it was profitable enough to say, hey, you know what, this is interesting. So I bought a bog. completely random. But, and it just went from there. We bought this little 2-acre bog in Rochester where I now live, because I bought another chunk of land that built a house there and all. But we started off with that little 2-acre bog, and at some point I had 45 acres. So
was that a big financial risk for you, or were you able to?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, getting into the agriculture world, you go to a bank and you say, "Gee, I'd like to borrow." I mean, at the time, the bog they were asking for $20,000 for this little 2-acre bog. It's like you go to a bank and you say, "I'd like to borrow some money to buy a cranberry bog," and he didn't laugh out loud, but you could tell that he thought that was a pretty humorous thing to hear. It's like, you want me to give you money so you can buy an agricultural business? Forget about it. The government, on the other hand, will, but you got to go through jump a lot of hoops to get into that. But we did it, and my parents were very helpful, very helpful. They made me pay back the loan, but they did let me borrow money. So, and that all worked out, and it worked out extremely well. And I just kept expanding, and we got more and more, and did more and more. It was an interesting business. The thing about the cranberry business is that if you're a cranberry grower and I'm a cranberry grower, we're just friends. We're not competing against each other. Because the product gets sold outright. So everybody helps each other, which in this day and age is uncommon.
Yeah, it really is.
It really is, and it was a very pleasant experience to get into that and say, you'd say, "Gee, I'd like to know how you do that." It's like, "Oh, well, come on over and I'll show you how we do it." And it's like everybody was like that. Everybody was just very helpful.
Do you consider yourself a farmer or specifically a cranberry grower?
Yeah. Terminology. We're considered growers as opposed to farming, because once you plant a cranberry bog, it's good. The original bog that I bought, 2 acres, was built in 1895.
Wow.
We've redone it.
Yeah.
But 1895, it's still there, pretty much like it was day one. So I mean, that's interesting in itself. That once you establish a cranberry bog, if you maintain it and don't let the weeds grow. But you're always fighting Mother Nature. That's the thing about being in agriculture. Mother Nature can be brutal.
So was your family upset that you chose another path instead of working with the family, or were they happy for you?
Happy for me, I'm not sure. They were all confused.
Okay.
I mean, cranberries were just like, nobody, I don't even know if anybody knew what they were.
Yeah,
it's like, oh, that's that red stuff you get at Thanksgiving.
Exactly,
right?
yeah.
So, it was like, why would you do that? We considered, my wife and I considered buying a restaurant early on. I mean, it was about that same time. It's like, oh, maybe we could go that route or do the cranberries. And we decided to do the cranberries, which was interesting. We have considered buying restaurants a couple of times in my life. The cranberry industry has had a couple of ups and downs, and at one point it was not profitable at all. And we thought, you know what, maybe we'll get back into the, because she worked in restaurants her whole life too. So it was a tempting thing to do, and we tried to buy a couple of places local. That it just never worked out. Either it was way beyond what I was prepared to. Like you're saying, you got to put yourself in debt to do that. That's that's.
And I want to ask, aren't restaurants? Can't they be a really risky investment as well?
Yeah. I don't know what the statistics are, but I would say if it's 50-50, in other words, half the people that buy and try to run a restaurant don't make it. It may be higher than that.
Yeah,
it certainly wouldn't be lower.
Yeah.
It's a difficult business. Labor is difficult to get, and I think as time goes on, I mean, it's probably more difficult today than it was 30, 40 years ago. But it's not an easy business, and I guess once you've established yourself, but that's the problem. In other words, that time period from opening your door to being established enough to have a steady clientele is very risky.
So, now, talking about the Raffas and the Riccardis restaurants, what do you think is a key factor in its success? Because I think it opened in Riccardi's at least opened in like 1970 something.
74. I think last year was his 50th anniversary.
Sure.
Yeah. Our family, my uncle Attilio, Raffa, and Mike Riccardi's father, Armin Riccardi, Rick, everyone called him, and a couple of my other uncles that were involved during the course of its evolution. But Attilio Raffa, Tillo, he was the primary. He was an entrepreneur. I mean, it was just his mindset. It was, it's like you put your heart and soul into something, you're going to do well. And that personality, that attitude, kind of infected the whole family. Everybody had that. It's like, yeah, go out there and do it. And so they worked hard at it. They put a lot into it.
Sure.
But they were all successful at it. So I guess we owe it all to him. And
sure.
He was a great guy, by the way. He was fantastic. But Pa Raffas, he owned Pa Raffas. His son runs it now, the one in the South End.
Sure.
But his other son, Nick Raffa, runs a Pa Raffas also. Or I think it's just called Raffas in Somerset.
Oh, okay.
He has a very nice restaurant there. So they were the original ones. The story goes, my grandmother and grandfather from Sicily, they had a big house on Howard Avenue. And my grandmother would cook meals, 11 children. They all worked at Titleist, Aerovox.
Okay.
Which I don't even know if Aerovox is there anymore. I don't believe it is. But they made capacitors back in 40s, 50s, 60s.
Okay.
So all the kids worked at Aerovox. It was about a quarter of a mile away from the house. So at lunchtime, they would all walk up to the house and have lunch.
Sure.
Nonna would have this meal all prepared. Well, they had friends, and so they'd invite some of their friends to come up and have meals with them at noontime, at Nonna's.
And this was every day?
Every working day, I
Yeah,
guess.
exactly.
But it was to take care of the family.
Yeah, sure.
Sicilians. So eventually it got to the point where everybody was inviting friends, and so they were like, instead of 11, there were 20, and then 25. So my grandmother thought, I'll charge people 25 cents for a bowl of spaghetti, a couple of meatballs. That is the beginning. So that worked out real well. As it turns out, my father became friendly with Felix Raffa, the oldest son of the family, and Felix invited him to Nonna's for lunch. So he went there and met my mother.
Okay.
And eventually in 1949 they got married. So it was, my existence is owed to that.
Wow.
That setting.
That's crazy. Okay.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. So Tillo, being the entrepreneur, in 1956, he opened a restaurant, Pa Raffas, on Acushnet Avenue, right up the street, just around the corner from Howard Avenue.
Okay.
There was a vacant building there. I believe it was a restaurant because I don't think they changed a lot.
Sure.
And he opened it up as a pizza, subs, spaghetti, simple, but and that's what started it all. And then they wanted to open up another restaurant because it was Mr. Riccardi and Mr. Raffa, Attilio, and so they thought, well, we'll open another one, and then each of us could run one, and
sure.
Competition, I guess.
I was gonna say, like, did they feel like competing against each other? Okay.
There's always competition.
Okay.
Always. So, and that's what so Pa Raffas in the South End. It wasn't in the building it is now. It was nearby there. But then they opened that one, and I'm not sure the year, but it was only a few years after. So maybe 1960, 61, somewhere in that area. My uncle Vincent Raffa, was in the service. He came back in 1962. He wanted to get in on this because they were both doing very well. Everybody was happy with the way things had turned out. So in 1962, he bought what was Barbara's Barbecue that had a fire and burnt.
Wow.
And so the business was gone. So he bought that where Pa Raffas is now, at the point in the North End. And there was a little friction there because it was like, hey, if you're going to open up a restaurant, you know, if it's going to be called Raffa's or whatever, you got to live up to the same standard that you know we've established here, because they you know, they did do a good job and people appreciated it, and they had good business. But he did. He stepped up to the plate and he got it done. But he called it Pa Raffas, and my grandfather was elated at that. You know, He used to go there. He'd have someone give him a ride there. He couldn't drive, but he'd have someone give him a ride there, and he would sit. There was a little booth in the corner, and he would sit there and just take in everything that happened during the course of the day. And, you know, about 6 o'clock, someone would give him a ride back home. But he'd be there for 4 or 5 hours every day. And I mean, he had a smile on his face all day long. You know, he just loved it. Why not? Why wouldn't you? You know, you see your kids doing well. It's
with your name on it, you know.
Right,
it's just
with
like,
your name on
this
it.
Is my
and the
family
menu with his picture on it. You know, it was like, yeah, he liked it. He liked it. It was good. And then, you know, there were other things they did. They used to have a pizza wagon that they'd go to the Portuguese feast, the Feast of the Blessed Sacrament.
Yeah.
Every year they would bring that thing down there. And again, it was Tillo that ran that, because he liked that sort of thing. And I remember going there as a kid and just, you know, helping out. Mike Riccardi, again, he would make pizzas, running that little pizza stand. But my grandfather would sit there, and people would come and go, and you know, all the old Italian men that lived in the area would all stop and chat, and he was like in heaven. You know, it was just wonderful. So from that point on, you know, Pa Raffas, to Ma Raffas, and what my grandmother had started, then Mike, I believe it was, 74, which wasn't a whole lot later than that. In 74, he opened up that you know, what is Riccardi's now. He struggled early on. I mean, I remember him calling me and saying, "Can you come and give me a hand, because nobody showed up to work today," and things of that nature. But you know, it was he was dedicated to doing it, and he loved it. He still does. He still does. And
so we're gonna wrap up part 1 with that, and that's a perfect segue into part 2, where we can then start to really dig into Riccardi's, and because I'm really curious about, because it was my first job, so I have a lot of questions about why you think it was successful. Were there other Italian restaurants in the area that inspired you guys, or was there just such a void? So we'll talk a lot more about that in part 2. I'm really glad that you were able to set up where we are now in this story. And I'm excited for everyone to finally hear the official record of this famous lore of New Bedford and Fairhaven. So please watch in part 2, where we continue and finish the story. This has been Ted Brillen. Thanks for watching. Catch us in part 2. Peace.
I'm running